At some point in life, you stop asking what you want and start wondering who you really are. Not the version of you that performs, not the version shaped by expectations, not the version that learned how to survive, but the version underneath all of it, the one that shows up when no one is watching, the one that makes decisions automatically, the one that determines what feels possible and what feels out of reach. Because whether you realize it or not, your life is not shaped by your goals. It's shaped by your identity. You don't rise to what you desire. You fall back to what you believe you are. This is why change feels temporary, why motivation fades, why breakthroughs don't last, why you return to familiar patterns even when you know better. You might say you want confidence, but live from the identity of someone who doubts. You might say you want abundance, but act from the identity of someone who struggles. You might say you want freedom, but choose from the identity of someone who plays it safe. And none of this is conscious. Identity operates quietly. It decides what you tolerate, what you pursue, what you avoid, what you expect, what you believe is for people like you. Most people never question it. They inherit an identity from childhood, environment, trauma, praise, criticism, and they spend their entire life trying to improve results without ever upgrading the source. And here's the part that changes everything. Your identity is not who you are, it's who you learn to be. A collection of conclusions you formed before you had context. Rules you adopted to belong, to stay safe, to be accepted, to avoid pain. Those rules became habits. Habits became behavior. Behavior became personality. Personality became destiny. And eventually, you stopped questioning it. You just lived from it. But once you began to ask the uncomfortable question, who do I believe I am? You create a crack in the structure. And through that crack, something powerful enters, awareness. Because the moment you see your identity, it stops being the truth and starts being a choice. And what comes next is the realization that your entire life has been responding to an identity you never consciously selected. Identity is not something you think about every day. It's something you operate from. It's the invisible framework your mind uses to decide what feels natural and what feels impossible. This is why two people can hear the same opportunity and respond completely differently. One leans in, the other pulls back. One sees possibility, the other sees risk. One thinks this could change everything. The other thinks, this isn't for someone like me. The difference isn't intelligence, it isn't talent, it isn't effort, it's identity. Your identity is built from answers to questions you stopped asking long ago. Who am I allowed to be? What happens if I stand out? What happens if I fail? What happens if I succeed? What do people expect from me? What feels safe to want? Those answers formed quietly through experiences, reactions, emotional moments, until they hardened into assumptions. And assumptions, when repeated, become rules. Rules like, don't take risks, don't expect too much, don't disappoint people, don't get your hopes up, don't be seen. You don't consciously follow these rules, you feel them. They show up as hesitation, as second-guessing, as playing small, as waiting for permission, as choosing comfort over growth. And here's the most important part. Your identity doesn't ask, what do you want? It asks, what matches who you believe you are? That's why goals alone don't change lives. Goals exist in the conscious mind. Identity runs the subconscious. You can want change deeply and still resist it automatically if it conflicts with the identity your nervous system is protecting. This is why self-sabotage isn't random. It's predictable. Anytime growth threatens identity, identity wins. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. And familiarity feels safer than transformation ever has. But here's where the shift begins. Identity is not fixed, it's reinforced. And anything reinforced can be revised once you understand how it was built. Most of what you believe about yourself was never chosen. It was absorbed, which means it can be questioned. And once questioned, it can be changed. What comes next is the moment you stop seeing identity as something you discover and start recognizing it as something you create. That recognition is where your power has been waiting. There is a moment, often quiet, often uncomfortable, when you realize the identity you've been living from is not the one you consciously chose. It's the one that was shaped by what you experienced, what you were told, what was rewarded, and what was punished. And once you see that, you begin to understand something powerful. Your identity was built for survival, not for expansion. It was built to help you fit in, to avoid rejection, to stay safe, to manage expectations, to minimize risk. And it did its job well. But the problem isn't that your identity protected you. The problem is that it never updated when your life outgrew it. So you carry rules into adulthood that were written in childhood. Rules like, don't speak up, don't disappoint, don't expect too much, don't draw attention, don't fail publicly. Those rules feel like intuition. They feel like common sense. They feel like you. But they're not who you are. They're who you learned to be. And here's the shift that changes everything. You don't have to destroy your old identity. You just have to stop obeying it. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to reject it. You don't need to judge it. You need to see it clearly. Because the moment you can observe your identity, you're no longer trapped inside it. You notice the thought that says, I'm not that kind of person. You notice the feeling that says, this isn't safe for me. You notice the impulse to shrink, to delay, to stay comfortable. And instead of assuming those signals are truth, you recognize them as habits, old instructions running on autopilot. That awareness creates space. And in that space, you gain the ability to choose differently. Not dramatically, not all at once, but deliberately. This is where identity starts to loosen its grip, not through force, but through consciousness. And once identity becomes conscious, it becomes flexible. The version of you that once felt fixed begins to feel optional. And the question that once felt threatening, who do I believe I am, starts to feel empowering, because you realize you are no longer confined to the identity you inherited. You are free to step into one you choose. And what comes next is the practical shift, the way identity begins to change in real life, through real behavior, in a way your subconscious can accept. Identity doesn't change when you declare it. It changes when you live it. Your subconscious doesn't respond to affirmations or intentions. It responds to evidence, small, consistent proof that the person you are becoming is real. This is where most people get stuck. They try to think their way into a new identity without behaving from it. But identity is reinforced by what you do, especially when no one is watching. So the shift begins here. Act from the identity you want to become in moments that feel slightly uncomfortable, but not overwhelming. Not dramatic gestures, not radical life changes, just small, deliberate actions that signal change. If the old identity avoids conflict, the new one speaks once, calmly, clearly. If the old identity plays small, the new one takes one visible step, even if the voice shakes. If the old identity waits for permission, The new one makes a choice without asking. Each of these moments sends a message to your subconscious. This is who we are now. And when that message is repeated, identity begins to update. You don't become confident by trying to feel confident. You become confident by acting when it would be easier not to. You don't become free by waiting for fear to disappear. You become free by moving while fear loses authority. This is how identity shifts without triggering resistance, because the actions are small enough to feel safe, but meaningful enough to feel real. Over time, these moments stack, and one day you notice something subtle. The behaviors that once felt forced now feel natural. The choices that once felt risky now feel aligned. The identity you are practicing has become the identity you live from. And once that happens, your external world begins responding differently, not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally acting from who you are becoming. What comes next is the realization that identity, once changed, changes everything it touches. There comes a moment when you stop trying to change your life and realize something far more important. Your life has been waiting for you to change first. Not on the surface, not in motivation, not in goals or intentions, but at the level of identity. You begin to see that the version of you who struggled, hesitated, played small, or stayed stuck was never who you truly were. It was who you became to survive a chapter that no longer defines you. And when that realization settles in, something releases. You stop fighting yourself. You stop trying to fix yourself. You stop seeing growth as a battle. You start seeing it as alignment. You understand that every time you chose safety over truth, it wasn't weakness, it was conditioning. And every time you now choose differently, it's not rebellion, it's authorship. This is the shift from inherited identity to chosen identity, from living out conclusions you absorbed to living from intentions you decide. And once identity shifts, everything else follows naturally. Your choices change, your boundaries strengthen, your standards rise, your reactions soften. Your confidence stops being something you chase and starts being something you embody, because confidence was never missing. It was buried under an identity that was never meant to be permanent. You don't become someone new, you return to someone truer, someone who trusts themselves, someone who moves with intention, someone who no longer asks, "Am I allowed to want more?" but instead asks, "What does the version of me I believe in do next?" And from that place, your life begins responding differently, not because the world changed, but because the identity engaging with it did. That is what unlocking your identity really means. Not becoming perfect, not becoming fearless, not becoming someone else, but becoming the author of who you choose to be from this point forward.